Hello there, I'm Jordan Appleton, and I'm afraid that to my subscribers I should owe you an apology. I've not created a video for quite some time. I've been incredibly busy recently. Yeah, doing that. I don't think that really should count as busy, should it? Anyway, in this video I'm going to talk to you about the Arctic Cooling Accelero Hybrid. I think we should kick things off by having a look around the box. The Arctic Cooling Accelero Hybrid is a graphics card cooler which uses a closed-loop liquid cooler to keep the GPU of the graphics card cool, whilst a series of small heat sinks keep the memory and voltage control components cool with the help of a fan mounted underneath its shroud. So, in the box we have a closed-loop cooler with a 120mm radiator, which whilst relatively thin should easily be able to cope with the heat from almost all current GPUs, even when they're overclocked. Combined with a water block and a pump which is connected by rubber hoses, which are reasonably flexible, and the water block itself actually has a copper base plate which should aid with decent heat transfer. Next we have a 120mm Arctic Cooling F12 fan with a PWM connection, so the graphics card can control the fan speed accurately. Then we have the graphics card shroud itself with the built-in fan for keeping the VRMs and the video memory cool. Here we have all the heat sinks for keeping all the various memory and voltage regulation components cool. As you can see, they're all different shapes and sizes for different uses. Then we have all the various mounting components for the cooler, such as the screws and the brackets required to hold everything to the back plate and to mount the fan and the radiator to the back of the case. Finally we have some Arctic Cooling MX4 thermal interface material, which sadly you can't quite make out in the video. So, to install the actual heatsink itself, or the heatsinks themselves onto the actual graphics card's components, you have to physically glue them to the components. Here is a picture of what my R9 290X looked like with all the components with the heatsinks glued onto them. You may also notice that there is a white piece of card over the GPU itself. That is to prevent you from gluing the heatsinks anywhere where they're going to get in the way of fitting the actual water block onto the GPU itself. Okay, so this is what the hybrid cooler looks like with my R9 once it's fitted into a case. Okay, so you probably want to know more about how well it performs. Well, my R9 if I ever ran Firmark, it pretty much always throttled. It would get up to 94 degrees and it would always throttle. Even if I set the fan speed to a maximum of 100%, it would still attempt to throttle. Now, it no longer does that. It still ran at about 92%, but it didn't throttle anywhere near as badly. This, however, is a problem with the card, not with the cooler. The card itself has a way by which, for about the last 10 degrees Celsius before it reaches its thermal limit, which is set by default at 95 degrees Celsius, it will go from nearly no fan speed at all, say about 30% by the time it's got to that, right the way up to the maximum that it allows itself, which is 55%. And then in an emergency, if you've set it to go up to 100%, it will continue to do so. It will at that point try and throttle instead. So what I had to do to get the best out of the cooler itself was to download some third-party software, such as Sapphire's, I think it's Trix, Trixx, which, even though it's a Club 3D card, I actually have better luck with. Club 3D do have their own overclocking utility, which is called Royal Flush, which seems to do a decent enough job, but I personally got better results with Sapphires. With that set, and with a custom profile set for the fan speed, I managed to get a much better response from the cooler itself, to the point where it would not throttle at all, even with a reasonable overclock of, well, I actually managed to push it up to 1100 MHz, and it still wouldn't throttle under Fairmark. Although I do believe it still managed to reach a maximum temperature of about 88 degrees Celsius, which is hot, but not as hot, and also that's with a 10% overclock on it. Now, it is annoying that you have to use third-party software for this, and that you can't just set it in a Catalyst Catalyst Control Center to alter the speed of the fan on the card. You can simply alter the maximum speed. But that said, it's handy. Well, let's put it this way: if you've bought this cooler, you're probably likely to be someone who's ready to tinker. After all, you've already stripped off the original heatsink, glued a load of smaller heatsinks on, and then fitted the liquid cooler to the back of your case. So it's fairly likely that you're going to be interested in overclocking, and you're fairly interested in tinkering with these things. So messing around with software to get the best out of the fans probably isn't going to be a problem to you. So overall, I'm fairly impressed with the cooler, to be honest. I've managed to sustain a stable overclock of 1050 MHz on the GPU instead of 1000, and the video memory speed is up to 1350 MHz instead of 1250 MHz. I know it's only modest, but this is my sort of gaming settings. I know they're perfectly stable. I managed to get much higher overclock, but I know this is 100% stable for sort of gaming purposes and for day-to-day use. I know for a fact, after 6 hours of playing Battlefield 4 or something ridiculous, I know this machine's still going to be running comfortably. However, I dare say that I probably could have got more out of it, and probably could have got higher higher overclock speeds. But I actually think that there's been a problem with my cooler, and I believe it is an Arctic Cooling QA issue. QA stands for Quality Assurance, if you didn't already know. After gently handling the cooler to actually, take it out of its box and then fit it into the case, I was rocking it over to actually fit it, and I heard some sloshing sound from the radiator. Now, this meant that there was air in the system. Now, don't get me wrong, I could have taken the radiator out of the box, given it a good shake, and I would have heard it sloshing around. This would have been before I'd actually fitted the cooler into my system, and I would have returned it at that point. But being as I'm fairly conscientious with the hardware I own, I don't want to shake and knock things unnecessarily. But surely, being a pre-filled and closed-loop system, the whole point is that it should be checked that it's properly filled and it's completely silent. And to be honest, as far as I can tell, it's an Ace Tech, I believe it's called Ace Tech cooler. So therefore, not only has it gone through Arctic Cooling's quality assurance, it's also gone through Ace Tech's quality assurance. So you'd expect that someone somewhere along those lines would have picked up that small problem before it was actually shipped. Now, the other problem with this is that air being trapped in the system means that the pump is constantly pulling bubbles through the pump itself, and that will mean that it's making a sort of constant clicking noise as it pumps air through. I admit this actually shuts up under full gaming because the air in there ends up saturated with water vapour at probably 75, 80, maybe 85 degrees Celsius. But either way, over time this would eventually cause the pump to fail, which is a bit of a worry when it's strapped to a £450 graphics card. So there you go, that is one sort of minor gripe I've got about it. But another concern I have is that when I actually attempted to contact Arctic Cooling about this problem, I've heard nothing since then. I tried to install this cooler back around about Christmas, and it's fitted and it all works, but I noticed the problem. I tried to get in touch with their support, and we are now on the 13th of February, and I heard nothing back. Now that is worrying. I mean, to be honest, they're the only people really who could actually help me with this particular problem, because I can't really take the heat sinks off and send it back to Amazon where this happened to have come from. I can't take all of the heat sinks off the graphics card and send it back to Amazon, because if I do, I will probably damage the graphics card in the process, which I'm not willing to try and do that. I'm sorry, but it's a very expensive graphics card. I am not willing to rip the heatsinks off the memory or the voltage regulation stuff and try and send it back, because at the end of the day I could end up killing the card completely. So Amazon won't take it back as a result, I'm fairly sure. So obviously the only people that could deal with it are Arctic Cooling. They're the ones that actually provided it. Now, don't get me wrong, you know, the only real way that this is going to work is if they send me a advanced replacement, really. Otherwise I'll be stuck without a graphics card for months, perhaps. Well, probably 28 days, but you know, I can't, since I've glued the heatsinks onto a graphics card, I can't exactly strap the stock heatsink back on, which is over here. I can't stick that back onto my graphics card now, because quite simply, where all these pads are covered in memory, well, RAM sinks, and obviously here and places like that they've got the VRM ones, so I can't fit this anymore. This is completely redundant. So if anyone wants a stock cooler for a R9 290X, leave a comment in the box below. So yeah, that's one thing. I will say this on a similar note: if you're fond of your graphics card warranty, I really would think very strongly about not fitting this, because quite simply, to do this you're removing the original heatsink and the original fan, and you are physically gluing the heatsinks onto the actual graphics card, and by doing that, as I've said, you will not be able to reseat your original cooler, and the biggest problem of course being that you've basically dismantled your graphics card, so there is no way that you'll be able to return it to the manufacturer. As for fitting, I do have another gripe. Where the pipes go along the bottom of the shroud, there are two holes which are designed for you to basically screw in two screws with washers on them, and the basis of that is that they will hold the pipes in place whilst it's in your system. But the screws themselves appear to be self-tapping. They actually feel like they're trying to carve a thread into the shroud itself, which on a fan isn't so bad, but when you've got what is a fairly fine pointed Phillips screwdriver and two screws which actually are quite sharp in their own right, the last thing you want to do is have that pushing into where pipes are. Now I'll admit I slipped a couple of times and I ended up sticking the pipes. Thankfully I didn't actually burst the pipes and cause the graphics card to leak. I've been running it for, as I say, nearly a month and a half, 2 months, and I've not had any liquid issues yet. That isn't how the air got in, let's put it that way. But if someone is paying attention and they really press on quite hard, they could very easily stick either the screwdriver or one of the screws through one of the pipes, and game over for the cooler. Or worse, if they don't realise, game over for the card. So yes, if anyone from Arctic Cooling is watching this video, please revise the product and make it so that the actual holes in the shroud where those screws go in have their own thread, preferably a metal one, and that you don't need to use sharp screws to do it. Just your normal average case screws or something similar, because there's no need to actually carve into the plastic. And I know it would increase the price, but it would just fix the problem and make it better to install. So yeah, that is a bit of a problem. The another issue that I have with it is that the radiator and fan installation. Now, the radiator, the fan itself, you have to. In fact, I will quickly, if I can, grab this. Now this is a Bit Phoenix fan, Bit Phoenix, anyway, and this will not fit into onto the cooler. I don't know if you can see that, but these corner pieces where I've got these little rubber fittings, but if you're using screws, these will not actually fit onto the radiator, because what you have to do is thread your screwdriver through the top hole and into the, with the screw, into the bottom hole and then into the radiator here, which means that will then hold this onto the radiator. So you do that with all 4 screws, and then you have to use normal fan screws to actually screw into the plastic of the fan against the back of the case. Now, I think this is a stupid idea, because I have a H100, and a Corsair H100 that is, and how that fits is it has long screws that reach through the fan and into the radiator with a washer on the end, and you can use that to reach through the fan into the radiator from the back of the case, well, top of the case in this case, but that means that you're going to mount it through the case, through the fan, into the radiator, and everything's nice and secure. With that type of arrangement, with the fan screws and then a second screw going into the radiator, not only is it fiddly to install by comparison, but it sort of reduces some of your installation options, and also the other side effect of it is that those screws generally ruin fans, which I know that sounds stupid, but if you've ever taken a fan off so that you can clean the blades or clean an air filter or something underneath it and put it back on, if you've ever done that numerous times, you'll find that the screws eventually get to a point where they've just completely sheared the holes on the actual fan itself, and it's useless. But that takes a long time, but often those screws are usually crap as well. I have to admit, for fan screws these weren't too bad, but it is still a grind. And then you've got the fan itself, the F12. Now, as far as I can tell, it's an airflow fan. So it's trying to suck air through the radiator and fling it anywhere it can, usually at the back of your PC case. Or, if you're mounting it to the front of your case, it's trying to pull cold air in and then blow it at, and I stress at, the radiator. Because the problem with airflow fans is all they do is scoop the air up and fling it straight forward. Actually no. It wouldn't be so bad if they flung it straight forward. They don't. In this case, it just goes everywhere. That's what airflow fans do. They're designed to bring cool air into a PC or to blow warm air out, not to go through heat sinks or radiators. So I tried. This is where the other problem comes back in. My original plan was to install a Corsair SP120 Performance Edition, so that SP standing for static pressure would be able to easily pull air or push air through the radiator. And of course, with that other stupid method of installing the screws, the bottom grommet bits that are all nice and rubber and squishy on the SP120s are too thick. So as a result, I couldn't fit that fan, so I'm stuck with the F12 until I find something else that is suitable. But why pack in yes, it's a thin radiator, but why put an airflow fan into a liquid cooler product? I don't quite get it, I'm sorry. But yeah, in summary, I think it's a brilliant idea, and I think with a few minor tweaks it could actually be a brilliant product. I mean, it has, I admit, been able to cool down my R9 290X quite comfortably. It's much cooler than it was stock with its original what was it? Yeah, this is a hairdryer. It's noisy, it's red hot, and I mean, it does its job, but it doesn't half make a meal of it. But the Arctic Accelero Hybrid does a much better job. But there's just these few little problems. I mean, the trapped air, that should never have happened. And I admit I was cheeky to ask Arctic Cooling to send me an advanced replacement. Now I admit they didn't even reply to me, which I think was totally wrong. Even if it was to say, no, we can't do that, but if you would like to send the cooler back, we can look into the problem for you. Because surely they must understand that I can't run my card without a cooler, and the only way that I can send the cooler back is by sending it back, obviously. But therein lies the problem. I can't send it back complete because I'll just end up ruining the card by pulling the heatsinks off. Equally, with air trapped in there, the last thing I want to happen is for the pump to burn out, me not realise the graphics card overheats, and not only has the cooler failed, my 450 quid investment has failed. So yeah, it's not as if it's a fan. They have to be able to provide some form of decent support, not just either A, ignore me, or B, fob it off, just leave it. But it is, in its own way, it's a good product, but this is the thing. I like it. It's a good idea. But I mean, it costs around about £80. I know that it's €120, and I think you can get it cheaper basically. But as far as I did some research into this when I originally wanted it, and so far as I can tell, there isn't a rival product out there. So there's no reason for Arctic Cooling, which they should, to raise their game, because there isn't a sort of consumer grade closed loop liquid cooling solution other than this. I have heard about another product which I believe is by NZXT, called the Kraken, which is one of the Kraken range, is essentially all the fixing equipment for a graphics card cooler to mount it onto, well, for a liquid cooler to be mounted to a graphics card. So you could in theory have a H100 or a H110i, or probably all NZXT's liquid coolers fitted. I'm sure it's NZXT. I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments box below if I'm wrong. But yes, and that is probably about the only other possible solution to this. So you can, maybe I don't want to set up my own custom loop. Maybe I just want something that's out of the box and ready to roll, which, as I say, it's a good product. I think there may be a market for more of them. Maybe do 240mm version instead of 120, or maybe a 140mm version, so that it's obviously suitable for cases with bigger fan mounts. But yeah, I mean, the only way that you could grow better, I suppose, is really with a full, custom loop. But that's probably the only thing to do. I'd like to recommend it, but with the issues I've had, I don't know. It's difficult to say. It really is. It's a product I like, and maybe it's a case of buyer beware. Make sure, unlike I did, that give it a quick shake. Make sure that it's not sloshing about or anything before you fit it. Before you take the heatsink off your existing card and fit it. And yeah, just see how I get on with it if you want to give it a go. But yes, I'll say again, great idea, but with just a few simple tweaks, it could be a great product. There you go. That's all I can say, really. So anyway, if you found this video useful, feel free to like, dislike, favourite, comment, subscribe, and yeah, preferably have the comments relevant. That would be nice. And yeah, as I say, if you want to see any more of my videos, feel free to subscribe, and thank you for watching.